All right. Welcome everyone back with another episode. On today's episode, alongside co-host Bianca Leger, we interview a clinical social worker and registered yoga teacher with the primary interest in teaching clients how to heal from complex trauma and nervous system dysregulation. She operates her practice from a deep understanding of trauma and attachment disruptions, using a combination of polyvagal theory, internal family systems, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing, integrative medicine, and somatic practices. She says, you have everything you need to heal. She's just here to remind you. Welcome to the winner circle, Jenna Hamm.
Hey.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Welcome, Jenna.
Absolutely. The goal with these conversations is to really uplift, inspire, and empower everyone listening along to move forward with greater faith and belief in themselves on their path ahead, on their hero's journey ahead. And as such, all the questions are pretty positive, pretty uplifting, and we start off with a great one. And that is, Jenna Hamm, what do you love about your world right now? Not about the world, but what do you love about your world right now?
Oh gosh. My world, I feel like, has two main realms. It's like my family and my work, and I am so in love with both of them. And I guess it's really about like the connection that I have. I have a really like beautiful home life that I'm so fortunate for, and you know, sort of was disconnected from for a while for various reasons. So that's been amazing to just, you know, come back to that and really notice how grateful I am to have the boys in my life that I have. And then, yeah, my work has just becomes like, it becomes increasingly meaningful over time, I guess, as I deepen as a clinician, but also, you know, in my own personal healing process. And as I think I like invite in clients who are, I don't want to say more aligned with me, because it's not about that. It's not that we have the same viewpoints or worldview or whatever. It's more just like they are interested in receiving what I can provide. Like, it just seems like there's so much more of a readiness and a connection, and the work that I'm doing now is so incredible. So yeah, my world is a really lovely place right now, I will say. That I have a lot of gratitude for. And those are sort of the two primary places that take up, I guess, almost 100% of my time.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
So, Jenna, you wear a lot of hats. I listed a few in the bio, but you're a clinical social worker, you're a registered yoga teacher, your mother, your wife, your daughter, your friend. You wear many hats, and no matter what the hat you're wearing, what would you say is your overarching mission that guides you in everything that you do?
That's an interesting question. There's like two words that come to mind when you say that. One is like hope, and the other is transformation. So in many different ways, I have like these beliefs about humanity that I guess are quite optimistic. And again, they've been tested many times in my personal life, but I really do keep coming back to them. So I just really believe that a change and healing is always possible in everyone. And you know, especially these days, there's a lot of messages around what our bodies are capable of, what our brains are capable of. Mm-hmm. So I think, yeah, in my interactions with other humans, that's like the primary message that I want to get across, is that like nothing is permanent. Everything is fixable, healable, changeable.
This is so beautiful. Yeah, I think we both have experience with this, like healing things within ourselves and realizing that we have this ability to transform ourselves. And I love everything that you use in your therapies, which I'm very excited to talk about. But I can see how this is a very unique approach. While unique, like more holistic, it would kind of invite people that resonate with this very like empowering way of addressing anything that is happening within the system.
Yeah. And we're gonna address that right now. Just in reading your bio, it says you approach psychotherapy from a personally held belief that nothing in the realm of mental health is permanent. Everything can change and improve with the right approach. And that brings us to the approaches. What are the approaches that you've been using to help people heal?
Yeah, it's so interesting because when I talk about these, it is kind of unique in the sense that there's a little bit of disagreement, or it seems like a lot of people think that these three approaches, the three therapeutic approaches that I use, don't fit together, right? So a lot of therapists are like purists, and so they really stick with one modality. And then they have their ideas about, you know, what's wrong or bad or incongruent with the others. So it is kind of strange because there's not a ton of support around integration with these therapies, but they make so much sense to me, and they always make sense when I like kind of combine them all with clients. So the first thing that I usually do with clients, of course, there are cases where I do things in different order, but typically the first thing I introduce is polyvagal theory, which is really just a deep understanding of the autonomic nervous system. So this is sort of the like unconscious, automatic ways that we react to things. So our nervous system does a lot for us without us consciously knowing about it. And getting in tune with that can be so helpful because then we actually can be aware of what was previously unconscious, right? And when we can become aware of it, we can do things to support our nervous system so that we get to interact with the world in ways that are more helpful to us. And, you know, whether that's increasing our tolerance for stress, for example, so that we can do hard things. You know, we can sign up for a class, we can get a new job, we can start dating, whatever. But it all starts with these basics of like getting to know what your stress response looks and feels like. And helping to shift that energy. And then, you know, for some people, there's more of that like depression or shutdown energy, we would call it. And then we need to bring more energy into the system. We actually need to have a little bit more of a stress response in the system. So people are unique in terms of where they might be, like we say, stuck often in the nervous system. And many of us are, without knowing it, kind of stuck in some defensive states that we no longer need to be in. There's usually truth to, at one point we did, you know, there was a hard time where we needed that kind of survival energy, and then it just never shifted. So you often need to support the nervous system. And it's sort of, I often introduce it sort of like, how we would interact with an infant, because you can't tell an infant, it's safe to go to sleep, go to sleep. You have to show it. And so it's all these like really subtle changes. We might do things like really be disciplined with routine, right? So when the nervous system knows like, oh, okay, when I wake up, I get this, this, and this. These three things happen every single morning. And then maybe these three things happen every single night. The nervous system knows like, oh, there's stability and safety here. I know what to expect. This is predictable. You know, and even like a certain amount, like not pushing ourselves beyond our limits, but pushing ourselves enough, right? That the nervous system starts to get, oh, I can actually handle hard things. Okay, I don't have to freak out about that. So it's like a lot of really attuning to yourself in this like very young kind of way. It can feel like to show your nervous system that everything is okay now. You can handle it now. So that it starts to let you feel safe, let you feel relaxed, let you feel connected again, instead of focusing solely on protection. So that's the polyvagal piece. Most of it is like educational, the way that I approach it, but you can also just apply it and get curious about it in session too, like noticing what might be coming up at that level as we communicate in a therapy session.
Amazing. I love this understanding of the nervous system, like it's like this alive entity within us that can't really see what's going on outside, and so we kind of have to create something inside that feels safe. Yeah. How reliable would it be for like you create something that feels safe and then you get exposed to a new trigger? Would your response to, let's say, the same trigger you used to have be different after some therapy, knowing that you kind of created something that feels safe inside? So is that it? You can go back.
Yeah, totally. I think one of my favorite things about working solely with polyvagal theory and helping people work on their nervous system is that I often hear things like that like, oh my gosh, this thing happened. And normally I would have yelled at my husband, or I would have freaked out, or I would have had a panic attack, and I just didn't. And so it's like this way we're doing this deep work, and we may not be targeting and specifically addressing that issue, but the issue resolves itself. Right. So it's like our nervous system, everything about us really does crave healing. So it doesn't take a lot. Like it just needs that nudge and that reassurance that it's okay to let go of some of those like previously held fears, and then heal and shift towards safety. So that is very common, that like, oh, this thing that used to be a trigger is no longer a trigger, even though we haven't done some of the other therapies, like whereas IFS and EMDR, we would target those things specifically. And they can resolve, and they often do, just by creating this like felt sense of safety on a really basis. Yeah.
Right on. So can you exemplify like how you use polyvagal theory to help resolve something within you or with the clients, so that we can kind of see this in action?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, again, everybody's so unique in terms of where they're stuck and what their triggers are and what helps and what doesn't. So I usually talk about these entry points to healing the nervous system, and some tend to work better than others, but again, we're all unique. So you can work directly with the nervous system, and that's things like breath, and often orienting is quite helpful. So all of them, I'll list the entry points, but I will say first that all of them are about linking the conscious mind to the autonomic like nervous system that we are normally unaware of, right? So that's really important. It's not just like mindless breathing. It's really connecting with how does it feel to breathe more deeply? Is it hard? Does it feel actually scary to breathe in this way that suggests that I am safe? Those types of things. So breath work, and then orienting, which is really just like observing your current environment. Because a lot of times when we're wired for survival or protection, our nervous systems will adapt to only notice danger cues and kind of neglect to look at the safety cues. So sound is this one has been studied quite a bit. There's Stephen Porges is the person who sort of created polyvagal theory, discovered it. He's a medical doctor, and he has a protocol called Safe and Sound, which is all about how it's mostly used with kids, but adults use it too. But he figured out that we will stop hearing like nice, soothing sounds and only tune into these high-pitched, scary sounds, which is incredibly dysregulating for people. So he has this like music program. I think it's about 5 hours of music that you listen to, and it helps to rewire the way that you hear your sounds in your environment. So that's really what orienting is about, not necessarily that protocol, but just like bringing your conscious attention to all of the safety cues that are present in your actual environment, right? The things that are here. And it can set, again, a lot of these things sound so simple that people are like, I don't even know. Why would I look at the lamp in my room? Whatever. But it's incredibly transformative. So I call that like direct nervous system interventions, breathing and orienting. And then there's the body. So of course the nervous system is stored in the body. The only attachment to the brain is at the brainstem. So all of the nerves of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system live in like the center of our body and then up into our face and inner ear. So working with the body is a really effective way to help your nervous system, right? And sometimes that might just be touch. And other times it might be movement, vigorous or really slow and mindful, or some kind of combination. All of these ways can be so supportive. Body work, deep pressure, those types of things. And then I called it limbic system interventions. So this is our midbrain, which gets a lot more complex. So this is where we can use things like visualization, expressing our emotions. So even like there's a practice called like primal screaming, where you just let out some of that energy through your voice. Obviously crying is a great way to discharge things that are stored. So a lot of limbic system interventions, and then you can use cognitive too, right? So just telling yourself things, and sometimes that trickles down, not always. So depending on how distressed we are, our use of thought will have sort of varying degrees of effectiveness. Doesn't always work to say I'm safe, especially if you're like really, really activated, like having a panic attack, right? But if that's what's available to you, or if that's what tends to work best for you, then we can still work with cognition if we need to. It just tends to be my like the last priority for me when it comes to the nervous system, at least.
Wow.
So that's polyvagal theory, and that's one of your 3 therapies that you incorporate into your practice. Let's go over the next one.
Yeah, so the next one, again, if I were to do it in the order that works for most people, would be IFS, internal family systems. This is a form of parts work. There are other forms. There's one called ego state therapy. Lots of people talk about like inner child healing. And to me, IFS is just the most transformative and compassionate and beautiful way to interact with ourselves in this way. So this model has the belief that we have something called like our core self, or sometimes we just call it self with a capital S, which is sort of synonymous with the state of safety in polyvagal theory, but it's really just this like essence of who we are that can't be damaged by anything, by any life experience or trauma or challenge or anything, that's always there. But we also have like these psychological parts. And so most people can identify with this feeling of like, a part of me wanted to go to the party and a part of me wanted to stay home. And sometimes are often more extreme than that. Like they really disagree on something maybe that you've done, and there's a critical part, and then there's a part that thinks it was the best choice or whatever. So we have these psychological parts that can easily be hurt by the things that we experience in our lives. So when we're born, if we were to have the perfect life, all of our parts would be what we call naturally valuable. So they would be these things, like these qualities about us that just are, these things that are natural to us. You know, I'm really good at this and that, and I'm interested in this and that. So it'd be these like parts of us that should have been that way, but life is always imperfect. And so they either end up carrying our wounds, our pain, or they end up in a position to protect us from further pain. Right? So those are these 2 main categories of parts. Some of them burdened with suffering of some sort, and some of them burdened with the role of keeping us safe and never letting that happen again. And so for most people, we work with that protective system first. Sorry, there's something going by. It's loud.
All good, all good.
Yeah, protective parts work really, really hard to keep those wounds suppressed, but the wounds always want to come up. So this is actually my sense of like when people actually arrive in therapy, it's because the wounds are overwhelming the protectors, right? It's not working anymore, and the wounds are really trying to be seen and healed. And so we still need to work with those protectors to make sure they're ready and understand like why we're doing what we're doing and why we're going toward the pain. And usually they are willing when they learn it would mean they don't have to work so hard anymore, right? So those protectors might be things like perfectionist parts, high achieving parts that overdo everything, that over exercise, or perhaps that like binge eat or drink or do other harmful things as a way to just get away from the emotional pain. They are usually very excited to not have to do that anymore. And then, yeah, we help unburden those wounds so that the system can become more harmonious. And then all these parts can go back to what they were meant to do. They transform back into those naturally valuable states. And I know that it can sound really bizarre, you know, using even the word they, like they as if they are separate. So a lot of it is metaphorical in the way that we use the language, but it is, you know, very much a belief across many different modalities that the mind is not unified, like that we are all sort of multi-mind. We all have these different, you know, you could call it different personalities in a sense, but it's really just, yeah, different aspects of ourselves that aim to do different things in our systems.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of questioning would you do? How would you guide somebody through this type of questioning? And do you need a guide, or somebody could also guide themselves through this?
Yeah, so the general rule of thumb is that it's safest to have a guide to unburden your wounded parts,
Mm-hmm.
just because that can get really big. And sometimes things come to the surface that weren't previously known, like weren't conscious. So it's helpful to do that part with someone.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very easy. Anyone can learn how to work with their protective parts. I have a course on it to teach people how to do that. So I go through the model and kind of make more sense of it and make it legitimate, because I know it sounds a little wonky, or at least I have a lot of intellectualizing parts that took a while to get on board with the whole idea. So I was like, maybe other people have those parts and they need to like understand more about what, what's going on inside when we're, noticing parts and things like that. So do a bit of that and then teach people how to just go inside and listen, what it sounds like when a part is trying to communicate, and then how to support it in various ways. So there are a few sort of general ways to work with parts, but it's quite intuitive, and it just depends on what's coming up. Yeah. Okay. Does that answer your question, or do you want more?
I'm curious about all of it. I know that we have a lot to cover, so I mean I am curious about the types of questions, but I see how it would be intuitive, so it would be so unique to all experiences.
Yeah, well, I'll give you some examples. So let's say like you came to me and you were like, okay, I have this like inner critic that just won't stop. It beats me up all day. And I say, okay, well, let's focus on that part. Mm-hmm. We might do something to help you access self-energy. So I usually incorporate something called like somatic IFS, which is just like, we might do some of those practices that are really grounding and regulating. We might do some breath. And then when you feel like you have a lot of space, you'd say, okay, turn toward that part of you that's been criticizing you, and notice where you feel that part in or around your body. Usually there's a sensation somewhere, or you feel something like energetically around you. And then you might just ask it an open-ended question like, okay, does it just let it speak? What does it want you to know about why it's doing what it's doing? And sometimes it communicates a ton, and sometimes it wants more or needs more kind of specific questions, right? Like, what is it afraid would happen if it stopped doing that? And usually something really insightful comes up, like, well, if I didn't criticize you, then you would screw up and this terrible thing would happen again. Do you remember that time you were so humiliated because you screwed up in front of the whole class, whatever? And it's like, oh, of course, then I totally get why you would want to do that to help me not re-experience that level of humiliation. And we might listen to it as it shares more of its memories, more of its fears, more of the emotion that it carries. And if it's willing, we might ask, is it okay if we go toward that humiliated part and help it heal so that you don't have to work so hard anymore? Depending on what it says, we shift to the wound and we come back and see, okay, well, now that that's healed, how are you feeling? Do you still want to do this? And usually the answer is no. And then we ask what it would want to do instead. And sometimes it's like, well, I want to hold you accountable, or I want to give you, I want to make sure that you're still doing good things with your life, but I just don't want to have to be so active all the time. So sometimes they totally transform into something completely different, and other times they just relax a little. Like they're just like, I just don't want to have to do this all the time, but I do want to make sure that you keep your house clean and, keep reaching for your goals or whatever.
Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you. I understand that better.
Awesome.
Yeah, as do I. That was really great. I'm
Cool.
learning more and more as we continue this conversation. I'm excited to learn about the third therapy that you incorporate into your practices.
Yeah, EMDR. So this one's, I feel like, more popular. More people know what it is. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It was originally meant not just for trauma, but that was the purpose of it, was to help people process traumatic memories. So those were all the original studies. Basically, it was discovered kind of randomly that when your eyes move back and forth in your head, your brain processes information. And so, with a lot of trial and error, there are all these protocols that were developed using this eye movement. You can also use tapping, and some people even use like tones. So it would be like a ding in the right ear and then the left, back and forth. Eye movements are sort of considered the most effective or the highest dose. So that can be a good thing or a bad thing. It can make it a little more intense, but it can also make it go faster. So anyway, we use some form of bilateral stimulation to target a specific memory that, you know, happened maybe a very long time ago, but still causes us a lot of distress when we think about it. So, you know, let's say you were in an accident and now you still have symptoms around driving. Every time I get in my car, I'm anxious, or every time I even just drive past that place on the street, I get panicky or whatever. So it's like, okay, that memory is still, you know, not processed. It's not in long-term memory. It's sort of, again, stuck in short-term memory. So let's target it and help your brain store it away. And the first part is desensitizing. So it's usually just, you know, we bring the level of distress down around the memory and then we reprocess. And that includes all kinds of things like reassigning blame. So a lot of times we blame ourselves when whether we're young. Sometimes things happen when we're young that have a big impact, but also when we're in a state of like shock, a lot of our logical, rational thinking goes offline. So we make sort of this emotional meaning. It also supports our survival to blame ourselves for everything, because if everything is my fault, that means that I can control things, right? If it's my fault that this accident happened, then I can do something to make sure it never happens again. So there's a purpose to doing that, but it often is not effective and it only causes us distress. So we would work through those types of beliefs, any emotions that are held related to the memory, body sensations. So it's like we process somatically, emotionally, and cognitively until, there's no longer any distress. The negative beliefs are sort of no longer feeling true. Now there are positive beliefs like, oh, wow, I survived that, or look at how strong I am, or whatever it might be. Integrate those. And that's sort of EMDR in a nutshell. You just look for those memories that need some support in moving into like long-term storage so they're not impacting you anymore.
Amazing. Wow.
So can you highlight how you use EMDR in your personal life and how that has helped you, so we can kind of see it in action?
Yeah. I am like unique in a sense, I guess. Not unique. There are lots of people like me, but it is very hard to turn off my thinking analytical parts. So I don't do great when I try, and you're not really supposed to. It's kind of illegal to do like EMDR on yourself, even as a therapist. So I find that it doesn't work when I try. I'm not supposed to, and it works a lot better when I have someone guiding me. And what I often need is actually like multiple sources of bilateral stimulation. So I kind of need those protective systems to be too distracted to interfere with me getting to my wounds. So yeah, I've seen people, I used to work in a group practice, and I would see someone there often. It was an interesting setup. Like you're not really supposed to do that, see your colleagues, but it was like, we wanted to help each other and support each other. And we also respected each other's like expertise. So we would sort of do sessions with each other. So that's probably where I did the most of my EMDR. I did a whole protocol around sleep. I'd really struggled with sleep at various points in my life. So targeting memories related to insomnia, and that was really helpful. I had a phobia around, it's called a metaphobia, like a fear of throwing up. That was pretty, it interfered with my life quite a bit. So I've done a protocol around that. That was helpful, but actually IFS ended up being more helpful later on. What else have I done with EMDR? Those were probably the biggest two, I would say. I had a car accident, but and I thought maybe there was something there, but it turned out there really wasn't much that I was holding on to related to that memory.
No, thank you for that. And it's interesting how you said you started out with EMDR for that phobia, and it ended up being IFS that helped you resolve it. And that's why I think it's so neat that you have the three main therapies that you integrate all together and they work in union. So it's very unique. Another tool that you use, and this is how we first connected, is through yoga. I met you at a yoga studio you're teaching, and in addition to being like an excellent, like super wise clinician, you're an amazing yoga teacher. And so let's talk about how yoga has helped you as a clinician and how that has integrated with those three therapies we just discussed.
Yeah, thank you for that compliment. I don't get to do a lot of teaching these days, so I do miss it. But my path with yoga was interesting because I have a part that is an over-exerciser. So, I used to run marathons and work out 7 days a week and really overdo it. And so at first yoga was kind of like another way that I did that, perhaps to like trick myself into thinking I was doing something restorative, but it was always those like power yoga, really intense styles of yoga. So it was always flow. And I'd still say that's generally what I lean toward now. But over time, and where I ended up doing my yoga teacher training was like a very traditional studio. It was the Yoga Center of Winnipeg. It's like Iyengar. And so it was a lot about alignment and a lot about yoga philosophy, which was it was really challenging and in a very different way. It wasn't necessarily physically challenging like I was used to. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm really looking at myself and through the lens of yoga philosophies and how do I interact with the world and my energy and all of those things. So that started to shift the way that I approached yoga quite a bit. And that was, oh my gosh, back in probably 2012, I did that teacher training. And then, since getting trained as a therapist, then it really became about like a somatic therapy. And even when I was in studios, I like tried to bring that in quite a bit, like just doing a lot of like that releasing of energy and discharging and thinking about how it feels to be in certain postures and versus others. Some might call that like some version of trauma-informed yoga, right? But I don't know that we actually have a really solid idea of what that even means at this point. But more recently, I also have an online course. It's called Strengthen and Soften, where me and another yoga teacher in the city, Amanda Carson, she's more into yin. So her go-to is like the soft, gentle stretches. So we thought it would be kind of cool to combine that and do this back and forth. Like, what's it like to go be in a yin pose and then work through a flow and then come back to yin. And so kind of stretching yourself, whether you're more of a sympathetically charged person, or you're more of that like shut down, lethargic type person. And so our goal was to create kind of a balance. And along with that, it was a lot of like polyvagal theory type education, right? So understanding your states in terms of what's coming up when you move in this way, or when you're still, or when you breathe like this, or whatever. And we also use some visualization and different things. So that was, that was really fun. We did one live version, and now we just have it like pre-recorded for people to do at their own pace. It seems like it's hard for people to show up, or at least it's not familiar after these last couple of years to show up somewhere at the same time every week. So 6-class series, you get a little polyvagal education, and then this like yin yang style yoga series. And that's probably that's probably where if I do continue to teach in different ways, that's I think gonna be my focus. Nervous system and yoga and how we connect the two.
I really love how you explain nervous response with being either like something where you're activated and you're like experiencing this high anxiety and you go into movement, or like the depression, and then you want to bring balance. So it sounds kind of like doing the counterintuitive thing, like doing the opposite to bring some sense of balance.
Yeah. Most people have some sort of like preference or like more comfort with one over the other, right? So some people do quite well with like that stillness and just being quiet and being alone, and then other people find that so difficult. Like it's so hard to sit still. My mind doesn't stop. My breath is shallow. I don't like it. And then other people are the total opposite, right? Where movement is like, I don't want to move. I don't have the energy to do that. Yeah. And so it's, in terms of change, what we need to do is like stretch ourselves in the areas that feel challenging. And then we call it pendulation sometimes in the polyvagal world, where you do the thing that feels like a stretch and then you come back to what feels familiar and comfortable, right? So it's like, for me, that it was so much more tolerable, even as I was teaching this course, to know like, okay, I've got 5 minutes of a yin posture and then I get to flow again, because that's my comfort zone, right? And that made it a lot more accessible to me. I would have had a harder time, and I do have a harder time when I sign myself up for like a 90-minute yin class. I'm like, oh, I dread it because it's so challenging, even though it does often feel great at the end. But that's often too big of a stretch for our systems, right? To do that, like 0 to 100. So the back and forth is helpful for most systems, because we do tend to have a bit of an imbalance.
And I imagine this is something you can cultivate also. Like you talked in the beginning about your tolerance to stress, so it can kind of build up as you practice.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's cool about these practices, is that like whatever works for you, whatever is available to you now, you can do that, and then it can spill over into other things, right? So this is one of the reasons why like exercise is so valuable, because when we push ourselves physically, it also tells our nervous system that we can do hard things psychologically, right? So you probably get that, Derek, right? With like all the things that you do and like the stress you put yourself under, that's like, oh, I find it's quite easy to do a lot of these social events that most people would find really challenging. I'm guessing in part, it's like you have so much resilience because of like the physical challenges you've placed yourself under, like over and over and over again. So it's like, it's cool to use that, like use the body, use the breath. So I love like fast-paced breath work. It's another example of doing something that feels really hard, really uncomfortable, but it increases our tolerance for stress in other situations,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Now I'd like to examine how you became a helper and what that call to adventure looked like. When did you feel the call to be a helper, and how did that process look like? Was it an easy step for you to take, or was there resistance met along the way? And whether that be on the clinician side of things or the yoga teacher side of things, or both?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like part of this realization some of it I've only come to recently, but when I remember when I was 16, I had this teacher. I tell the story often. I had this teacher, and I was sort of like, I was like not good in school. Like math, science, English, French, nothing ever really registered, and I wasn't interested. And I probably have some ADHD. So I was like, I can't focus unless I really care about something. I can't learn about this. Like I did, my mind was just all over the place. So I never did well in school. I was not very athletic. But this teacher, when I was like 16, said to me, "You're going to be a social worker." And I didn't know what a social worker was at the time. So I was like, "Oh, what's that?" And he's like, "Well," or I said, "Why did you say that?" or something. He's like, "Well, you're always helping people with their problems, even when they're not your friends." And I don't think I really thought much of it then, other than I was like, oh, it was nice that someone noticed I am good at something in school, or that I do something helpful here. And then I went to university really like open-minded, like not with the intention to study anything specific, but it was kind of typical. Most people in university take like sociology and psychology. So I did. At the time, I was more interested in sociology, so I kind of went that route, like more I actually didn't get my first degree in social work. My first degree was in human ecology and family social sciences. So I studied that, and then started working with like young moms and teenagers who were aging out of like the child welfare system. And then I worked in child protection for 8 years. And yeah, all of it was like just kind of flowed really naturally. And then as I was in child protection, I always knew I wanted to be a therapist. Like I think from 21, at 21, I applied for my first graduate level program, but they basically said like, you're a baby, you can't be a therapist yet, go get some experience and then come back. And then I ended up doing the Master's of Social Work program at the U of M. And then, yeah, I got into private practice right away. Like it really has all been so smooth. Got trained in these modalities really quickly, like soon after I graduated. There's been no resistance. What I will say is like, this is my comfort zone is providing care to other people. Very difficult for me to receive care. So sometimes I have curiosities around how much of this journey was because of that. Like, it's like, if I put myself in this position, that means that I can always be the one offering care and support, and I don't have to worry about anyone trying to give it to me. That feels a lot safer. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly something I've been working on probably in the last year in a pretty significant way. It's just being able to like accept love and support from other people, other humans. It's very important as a therapist to get your own therapy. So doing that in more deep and meaningful ways too. Yeah, that's the story to becoming a therapist.
Mm-hmm. And one way that you're allowing yourself to receive care right now is you getting your own therapy. What are some other ways and essential self-care practices that you use to attend to your total optimal health and well-being?
Yeah, well, we obviously aren't going to get into this, but I got really sick for a couple of years, very, very sick for the second year. And I couldn't work for a lot of that year. And then when I figured out what was going on and started healing and kind of made my way back to this work, it was really important that I had big gaps in between my sessions, because there was so much that I had to do just to be stable, to make sure I was okay. So things like, going on walks every day, getting morning sunlight, doing breathing exercises, making sure I was on a pretty limited diet for a while. So making sure I had the time to like cook those foods for myself. Even though I don't necessarily rely on all of those practices as much now, I have the same schedule. So I have these big gaps, these 45-minute gaps between my sessions. Most of them, I have a couple where I do back to back, but most of my sessions are really spread out through the day. So in between, I'm still just in this habit of like, okay, what do I do for me? Either I'm going to sit and eat a nourishing meal, or I'm going to do my movement for the day, do some kind of workout or yoga or walk. Sometimes it's even just like getting the house clean so I don't have to do it with a 5-year-old running around, whatever. So that's been really, really helpful for my system. And I've played with a lot of different schedules since becoming a therapist. I've played with doing like the back-to-back so that you get off early and then you have the rest of the day. I've played with doing like having certain days off in the week and pushing more into the earlier part of the week. My system just does better with like 5 days a week, a lot of like in and out. So a little bit of work and then a little bit of something else, whether it's taking care of some errands or taking care of myself or whatever. So, my advice to anyone is just like figure out what does feel like balance to you. If you have the choice, not everybody does, of course, but when you have the choice, it's like we all have this unique need, I think, and it can be tricky to find, but playing with different options is so valuable. And it really, I think it's benefited my work with clients so much too. Like I'm just so much more ready and I have so much more energy to be present when my stuff is all taken care of,
Absolutely. Self-experimentation sounds to be very important. So you mentioned your transition to being a helper. There wasn't much resistance, but let's put ourselves in someone else's shoes. Let's put ourselves in a hero's shoes where they're feeling the call. They're feeling that call to adventure in their heart, but they're stuck. They're stuck at that crossroads of should versus must. And they're stuck in place, weighed down by the shoulds of society, of culture, of parents, of whatever, religion, that are keeping them in the familiar. where there's that deep inner intuition, that knowing, that must calling them to step into the unknown, to evolve, to flourish, to grow as you did when you decided to say yes, a resounding yes to moving forward as a healer. What would you say to that hero stuck in the path at that crossroad of should and must?
Yeah, I love using parts work for this. And what you described were like some legacy burdens and cultural burdens. So legacy burdens are things that have been sort of passed down through the family. Either it can be very negative, like, oh, everyone in our family is a criminal or an addict, and you're never going to do better than that. Or everybody in the family is a lawyer or a doctor, and you need to do those things. You can't be an artist because that would be so useless or whatever, right? So those things that we learn either directly or indirectly from our family. And then culturally, right? Well, what's respected? What is honored? What should a man do? What should a woman do? What is okay? What makes money? Whatever. So there's these cultural burdens. And so we can get curious about that. You're also describing like this polarization, right? Like, I want to do this, or many parts of me want to do this, and many others are terrified to, or they think it's a bad idea, or they have that same voice that my dad had when he told me how stupid it was to follow this path. And so you can, sometimes I create like a meeting room, I call it, where we just bring all these parts to the table. And it's like, tell me what's going on for you and you and you. And we listen, right? And that the person's self really listens. And then we can help. It's like, well, is that your belief or is that your dad's belief? Is that your belief or is that, the culture that you were raised in? And are you ready to let that go? Do you want to unburden that? And then we can. So we can help those parts release the things that don't belong to them. And there's usually just this incredible clarity. It can be so, even just like in one like hour-long session where we have this meeting room exercise and connect with parts, and the person realizes, oh, so much of this I don't believe, and I never wanted to, and it never belonged to me, and I'm so happy to get rid of them, and now I know, right? Sometimes it takes a little while to get all of that organized and to feel like there's like harmony with all those parts. But yeah, it's really helpful to just get curious about like the why do you want to and why don't you, and honor that, and instead of like pushing against it or forcing yourself to do it before you're ready. It's so much better usually for us if we do it from a place of like, now I know I'm in the right place. My whole system is on board. There's there might be a little bit of like, oh, this is scary because it's new, but it's not like I don't actually believe I can do this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I love that approach. It's so compassionate. Like instead of like pushing somebody off, like still dissociating if you're doing that, or like pushing yourself if you're not ready. It's like you're not one with yourself. So I love that way you explained that, making sure that when you do that move, you're one with yourself and you're going for it, and at least you have a better awareness of what's going on within. I love that.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. So my next question, I totally got lost where it was. But yeah, no, it was really beautiful. So much wise advice that you shared with us. And let's take a moment to acknowledge some of the people that have helped you and mentored you along the way. You've mentioned a few. There was Stephen Porges. There's your high school teacher when you're 16. There's Amanda Carson. So those are a few people that you mentioned who've had an impact on your journey. Who are some others? Who were they? And what were your primary takeaways from them that you've incorporated into your being?
Oh gosh, this is so tough. Yeah, so I mean, Dr. Kelly Penner-Hutton, she's out of Peace of Mind Therapy in Winnipeg. So that's who I did my EMDR training with. And I've come to learn that she must be one of the best EMDR trainers, because she was even so holistic in her approach to teaching, where like I learned about polyvagal theory in EMDR training, and I learned about parts work in EMDR training. Most of the time when you encounter an EMDR therapist, they are like, EMDR is the best, you don't need anything else. Just EMDR. So she was incredible. And just in terms of like, yeah, like she was great at drilling the protocols into our brains, but she was also really good at showing us that we needed to look at a lot of different things and be aware that, you know, it's more than just a memory that we're dealing with. There's a whole person here that we have to be, you know, considerate of. So she was amazing. Richard Schwartz is the founder of Internal Family Systems. He pops into a lot of my trainings, but most of my training I've done with someone named Frank Anderson. And he is a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, which that's been really cool for me because I respect him so much. He's such a brilliant teacher. And I have a lot of biases around psychiatric care. So it's been helpful for me to hear like how he integrates the two and how he makes sure that like someone's entire system of parts is on board before introducing a medication, and how incredibly helpful they can be in some circumstances. So that aspect has been helpful, along with his ability to just teach the model in a way that just works for me. I've done a lot of different IFS trainings, and no one has been as helpful as he has been. I did some stuff with Irene Lyon. She's a big nervous system person. I did one of her courses sort of for like personal reasons. That was really helpful and really challenging because it was a lot of very slow, mindful movement. So that was a stretch, but it was great. Who else? Gosh. There's a practitioner in the States named Brendan Vermeyer. He's actually a health coach, and he's brilliant. He has helped me a lot personally, but also professionally in terms of understanding more of like the nutrition and integrative medicine aspect to mental health. His big thing is talking about neuroinflammation, and that was actually what I was dealing with when I was really sick and didn't know that's what I was dealing with. So he supported me personally, and then I just learned so much from him. He does a lot of things for free, and then he offers training for practitioners, whether you're a therapist or, you know, nutritionist or those types of things. So yeah, he's been incredible over this past year or so. Those are probably the top that are coming to mind, but I could probably list like so many more. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you've learned from so many, and let's reflect just from all you've learned through all the highs and lows that you've experienced in this journey of life. What right here and now do you feel is the greatest life lesson you've learned on your path that you feel in this moment feel called to share with us?
I think what I was saying earlier, that nothing is permanent. And it was one of those statements that I would make as a clinician that I thought I believed, but I didn't believe it until I really had to live through it, right? Until I had to live through a period of like complete hopelessness and thinking I would never change and nothing would ever get better. That I thought I would never be a therapist again. I thought I would never be a good mom again. And to have recovered from that, it's just like, now it's true in every cell of my body that change and recovery is always possible for everybody, you know? And so I think it's very different now when whether I, again, directly say that to a client or I just hold that truth as I work with them, I think it is impacting my clients so differently. So, you know, a lot of people come to therapy and say that, like, I've been depressed for 15 years, you know, nothing's going to get better. And it's almost like I just don't accept it. It's like, okay, let's go. Let's try some things, you know? So I think that's like the biggest thing that guides most of my work. Nothing is permanent. Everything is changeable. There's hope for everybody. And I know it because of how deeply I had to live it.
That's powerful.
Absolutely. This has been such a exciting, like amazing conversation that I'm glad we had. And to conclude every conversation, we ask every guest the final 2 questions. But before we get there, I just want to leave the floor open to Bianca if she has any lingering questions that she'd like to ask or any closing thoughts before I ask my final 2 questions.
Well, I don't have particular questions coming to mind. I'm like listening and learning from you right now, Jenna. yeah, let's go with the questions.
All right. In 3 words, Jenna, how would you describe the experience you're having on this earth? And it doesn't have to be a sentence, just 3 words that describe the experience you're having on the earth, and you can elaborate what those words mean to you.
Joyful is one that comes to mind. Trust is another. Let me see. This is a hard question. Growth.
Joyful, trust, and growth.
I love that. I love that.
Let's talk about each one. Let's talk about the joyfulness in your life.
Yeah. It's so related to just, being sick for so long. And even this summer has been so amazing because I started getting really sick in the July, it started July 2019. And then got again worse July 2020. Last summer, I was sort of just starting to recover, or I was doing fairly well, but not well enough to just live and be free and things that I wanted to do. So this is the first summer since 2018 that I could just like go to the beach or go to rent a cabin for a weekend with my family and not worry that, I wasn't going to be okay or whatever. So it's so incredible how, and like just how much gratitude and joy you can experience when it's been taken from you in such a big way, And I am someone who learns everything the hard way. so a lot of people can just recognize how fortunate they are and practice gratitude. And I guess I'm someone who has to find out what it's like to be really miserable in order for that to come naturally. So yeah, I just like, I'm so happy every day that I just get to go to the park, go to the pool, go to the beach, do anything that's just fun and has nothing to do with my health. It's such a privilege. So that's what I would say about the joy.
Yeah, and the issue you were dealing with was a neuroinflammation, or what was the issue?
So our house had toxic mold. And we didn't know that. We knew that we had some like water damage, but we didn't know that it could cause like neuropsychiatric symptoms. So sorry, it's loud again.
All good.
Motorcycle. So it was basically, it started with like really severe insomnia, like where I would be awake for days, 3 days. And then, ended up on a bit of a hamster wheel of psych meds and different things, not knowing what was going on. Eventually starting to connect dots. There are so many, it was really through social media, people sharing their lived experiences and then practitioners talking about how mold can do this to some people. There's a genetic susceptibility and there's a lot of other things that make people more likely to get sick. So my partner and my son weren't affected at all. So I think that made it harder to figure out too, because if we were all sick, we'd be like, okay, well, what are we all being exposed to? It was mold, and it started with insomnia. It turned into like really horrible anxiety, and then it was like I would just describe it as like complete dissociation. Like I was lethargic. I laid in bed like day after day after day. I couldn't do anything. I could barely string sentences together for a period of time, so it got progressively worse. And then I started finding this information and testing the house and testing my body, and we moved, and then it's been kind of, I know people say healing isn't linear, but it has been fairly linear for me. Like we moved and it's been really great ever since. So that's the story with my illness.
Amazing. What gave you hope during this time, Jenna?
For a lot of it, I didn't have any. It was like my family was really carrying me and holding the hope for me. And like, it was just sort of waking up every day and trying. Once I moved, I had a lot of hope. So I now know a lot of people who've been through this. And I think where they get stuck is they stay in that place of hopelessness, even though they've gotten answers, right? And so it seems like no matter how good their treatment is or how, you know, clean their environment is, their symptoms don't resolve. But for whatever reason, I am generally naturally a pretty optimistic, hopeful person. So it's kind of like the second I moved, it was like, this is it, I'm going to get better. And I just committed to doing this. I mean, I did a lot of work every single day, but it wasn't anything fancy. Some people really do these really complicated treatments. And for me, it was just like sunlight, movement, you know, clean water, good food. Some, like, you know, I wouldn't say a lot of supplements. I did take a lot of supplements that were very helpful, but it was mostly the basics, like just kind of getting the foundation and trusting that my body would know what to do when I helped it release some of what it didn't want and get more of what it needed.
And moving houses, that definitely played a big part, I'm sure too. And that brings us to the next word, and that's trust. How have you cultivated trust in your life? What does that word trust mean to you?
Yeah, trust is hard because I'm such a thinker, and I think for me, trust involves like an element of faith, you know, in that everything is happening the way that it's meant to, and just trust. So part of it is like, yeah, that what happens with being sick. I'm also, I don't know if you know this, I'm pregnant with my second child, and that was a surprise, and you know, at a time where I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. So that has been a lot of practice of like coming back to like, okay, if this is happening now, it's because it's meant to happen now, and I know that I can handle whatever happens next. So there's been a lot of need for me to work on that in this scenario. Yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest area, is just trusting around going through all of it again.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And then the third word that describes the experience you're having on this earth is growth. What's that mean to you, growth?
I mean, a lot of it I have grown over the past, especially the way that I practice therapy has grown a lot. Teaching, like I teach about Polyvagal Theory, I teach about IFS, I'm teaching this combination yoga program. So that's all fairly new to me as a therapist. That's been like one example. But I think more than that is I have this tendency to like want to be very certain about things. Like, this is the way that it is. This is how trauma works. This is neuroscience, you know. And really, like lately, it's just been like this letting go of like, I don't really know. They don't really know. Like, I'm just sort of open to so many more possibilities, and learning that it's actually not that stressful or scary or dangerous to not know everything, you know. So just like a lot of growth in terms of opening my mind to so many different possibilities, I would say.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing all that. Joyful, trust, and growth. Sounds like quite a reality. Our final question. We've explored time. We've ventured into your past and examined how you became who you are today. Let's fast forward. Let's fast forward into the future, and let's transform us into a time far away from here. And let's occupy space with an 85-year-old Jenna Hamm. Who is this 85-year-old Jenna? Where are you? Who are you surrounded by? What are you doing? And what is the legacy that you've left here in your time in this place?
Gosh, I am not someone, I don't think about the future much at all, like other than what I know is about to happen. So this is a hard question, and I kind of my partner is very much like always dreaming in the future. So we have these arguments about like, don't waste your time thinking about 40 years from now, and he thinks like, aren't you just curious? Like, don't you want to plan for that or whatever? So he would say a lot about having a big family and having all these people around and living somewhere different, and it's really hard for me to answer that question. I don't know. I know that I always say I never want to stop working. I have no interest in retirement. So hopefully I'll be an 85-year-old therapist still providing decent services. I would hope that my family is close. My children are close. I see a dog. Mostly, I think that's my partner's dream too. And I see, not being in a city, like just being out in nature somewhere more permanently.
Mm-hmm. And what are the predominant feelings that you are feeling as this 85-year-old embodying her reality? What are the primary feelings that encompass her reality?
Oh gosh, this is like something I have never thought about before, so give me time.
Give all the time you need.
There is something oddly like calm about being that age, like knowing you I think I would have said before actually like imagining it and trying to embody it, that it would feel very scary and sad to be at the end or closer to the end of your life, but it actually doesn't feel that way, at least right now. It feels like quite beautiful and quite calm and like reassuring just to look back and know like that's it, like I've done this all, you know. It seems very peaceful actually.
Beautiful. Would you like you just to stay in the feeling of this 85-year-old Jenna for one moment longer? And I'm going to bring us back to this present moment, the infinite now. And that 85-year-old Jenna, she sends you a message. She whispers something in your ear. What does she say?
First thing I heard was slow down. That's really interesting. And this is so much like parts work, where you just would get a message like either that's like self energy saying something like that to the rest of your system, or you just there's also the spiritual element of IFS where sometimes you connect with that, where you just hear a message that seems to be coming out of nowhere. So that's a familiar feeling to me, but and it's not surprising to hear the word slow down. But that's a cool exercise.
Well, she's a wise woman, as are you. And for anyone wanting to connect with you, they can find you on Instagram at Felt Sense Winnipeg, or online at Jenna Hamm, JennaHamm.com. Where else can they find you, Jenna?
That's it, really. Those are my two spots, at least online.
And you have various course offerings, as you mentioned too. And if someone wants to work with you as a client, they can connect with you online and set that up.
That's right. Yeah. I have a very long wait list, so it's probably going into like 2023 now, probably like halfway through the year. So one-on-one work is harder, but courses are available now. I do group things too. So once you've taken my courses, I sometimes do other little follow-up classes just to come back together and work out anything that people are struggling with. So that's available. People can access all the group things.
Amazing. I'm super grateful for this conversation, all that we've learned and all that you shared. And I'm excited for everyone that will be listening along to this in the future, in this now when they're hearing it. Close every episode. Your fist in for digital fist bump, a step into the winner circle, the choice that we all have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jenna.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, it's been a pleasure.